The late afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty main street of Willow Creek, painting everything in shades of amber and rust. The year was 1882, and the small frontier town sat like a weathered scar on the face of the Arizona Territory, where civilization met wilderness in an uneasy truce. Dust devils danced between the wooden buildings, and the air shimmered with heat that made even the hardiest souls seek shelter in the shadows. Samuel Hayes stood at the edge of the gathering crowd, his weathered Stetson pulled low over steel-gray eyes that had seen too much of life's harshness. At 35, he cut an imposing figure, tall, broad-shouldered, with a lean strength that came from years of working cattle under an unforgiving sun. His face, tanned to leather and etched with lines of solitude, betrayed nothing of his thoughts as he watched the spectacle unfolding on the makeshift auction platform. The crowd buzzed with anticipation, their voices a mixture of excitement, disgust, and morbid curiosity. Men spat tobacco juice into the dirt while women in calico dresses whispered behind gloved hands, their eyes wide with scandalized fascination. The object of their attention stood on the platform, chains binding her wrists, though Samuel doubted any chain could truly hold what he saw in those fierce amber eyes. She couldn't have been more than 23, with tangled auburn hair that caught the dying light like copper wire. Her dress, once perhaps white, was torn and stained with the evidence of struggle. Blood had dried at the corner of her mouth, and bruises painted her arms in shades of purple and yellow. Yet she stood straight-backed, chin raised in defiance, meeting the hungry gazes of the crowd with a look that could have scorched the earth. "Gentlemen, what we have here is a genuine wild creature." The auctioneer, a greasy man named Josiah Pritchard, gestured dramatically with his gavel. "Found living like an animal in the canyons, stealing from honest folk, fighting like a demon when cornered. The sheriff's boys had quite a time bringing her in." A ripple of laughter ran through the crowd. Someone shouted, "What's her name?" "Pritchard." "Goes by Elena, though Lord knows if that's Christian or heathen. Speaks when she pleases, which ain't often, and fights like 10 men when riled. The county's washing its hands of her. Whoever takes her on does so at their own risk." Samuel's jaw tightened imperceptibly. The girl, Elena, turned her head slowly, scanning the crowd with the wariness of a trapped wolf. When her eyes met his, something passed between them, quick as lightning and just as electric. Recognition? Challenge? He couldn't say, but he found himself stepping forward through the crowd. "Now, I know what you're thinking," Pritchard continued, mopping his brow with a stained handkerchief. "Why would any sensible man want such trouble? Well, gentlemen, sometimes the wildest horses make the best mounts, once they're broke proper. She's young, strong as an ox, and with the right hand to guide her. She ain't no horse." "Pritchard!" Elena's voice cut through the air like a whip crack, raw and fierce. "And I'll kill any man who tries to break me." The crowd recoiled, some men laughing nervously, others shaking their heads. A woman near Samuel clutched her husband's arm, whispering, "It's ungodly. James, no Christian woman speaks so. That's why she needs a firm hand." Another man replied, his eyes glinting with something that made Samuel's fists clench. $20, someone called out. 25, 30, and that's generous for such trouble. Samuel watched as various men bid, each call accompanied by lewd comments or boasts about how they'd tame the wild out of her. His stomach turned at their words, though his expression remained carved from stone. He'd come to town for supplies. Not this circus, but something about the girl's desperate dignity held him rooted to the spot. $40. A heavy-set rancher named Bull Morrison pushed forward, his face flushed with drink and excitement. "I'll take her off your hands. Pritchard, got a place on my ranch for spirited fillies." The crowd laughed at Morrison's crude joke. Elena spat in his direction, earning a backhand from one of the deputies guarding her. She stumbled but didn't fall, blood trickling fresh from her split lip. Now, let's keep this civilized," Pritchard called out, though his grin suggested he was enjoying the spectacle. "Do I hear 45? Samuel found himself moving before he'd made a conscious decision. The crowd parted as he approached the platform, his spurs ringing against the wooden boards as he climbed the steps. Up close, he could see the fear beneath Elena's defiance, the exhaustion in the set of her shoulders. $100, he said quietly, his voice carrying in the sudden hush. Pritchard's eyes bulged. 100? Well, Mr. Hayes, I didn't expect— 100, Samuel repeated, pulling a leather pouch from his coat. Cash, end this now. Morrison pushed forward, face reddening. Now wait just a minute. Hayes, you can't just— Samuel turned, fixing Morrison with a look that had backed down men twice his size. I can, and I will, unless you're prepared to bid higher? The crowd held its breath. Morrison's hand hovered near his gun. But something in Samuel's stance, the easy way his hand rested near his own Colt .45, made the other man reconsider. Frontier justice was swift, and Samuel Hayes had a reputation for being faster. She's all yours, Morrison spat, literally and figuratively. No man could tame her anyway. You'll see soon enough. Samuel counted out the bills, his movements deliberate and calm. As Pritchard greedily snatched the money, someone from the crowd called out, "What are you planning to do with her? Hayes, your ranch ain't no place for a woman." He turned, addressing the crowd for the first and last time. "What I do on my land is my business." Then, almost as an afterthought that only Elena could hear, he added quietly, "Then let's see if she'll ride straight into my heart." The words were part challenge, part mockery of the whole ugly spectacle. But something in his tone made Elena's eyes widen slightly. She searched his face, looking for the cruelty she'd come to expect from men, but found only a weary sort of determination. "Unlock her," Samuel ordered the deputy. "You sure about that, Mr. Hayes? She's liable to run first chance she gets." "Unlock her," he repeated. The chains fell away with a clatter. Elena rubbed her raw wrists, never taking her eyes off Samuel. The crowd pressed closer, eager to see if she'd attack or flee. Instead, she stood perfectly still, like a deer deciding whether to bolt or fight. "You bought nothing," she said, her voice hoarse but steady. "I am no man's property. Never said you were." Samuel replied, "But the law says different, and right now, getting you away from here seems the best of bad options. You coming peaceful, or do I leave you to them?" He gestured to the crowd, where Bull Morrison and others waited like vultures. Elena's jaw worked, pride warring with survival instinct. Finally, she gave a short, sharp nod. "I'll come," she said. "But I won't kneel, not to you, not to anyone." "Never asked you to," Samuel said, already turning away. "Wagons this way." As they descended the platform, the crowd parted reluctantly. Samuel could hear the whispers following them, speculation, condemnation, pity, and envy all mixed into a toxic brew. Elena walked beside him, not behind, her head high despite the chains she no longer wore, at his wagon, loaded with the supplies he'd originally come for. Samuel paused. "Can you ride?" "Better than any man here," Elena shot back, defiance flaring. "Good. There's a mare tied to the back. She's yours to use." He saw her surprise and added, "Long ride ahead. Be easier if you're mounted." As she moved toward the horse, an old woman called out from the crowd, "You're making a mistake. Samuel Hayes. That wildness can't be loved out of a person." Samuel swung up onto his own mount, a solid black gelding named Redemption. "Not trying to love it out," he said, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Maybe it doesn't need to come out at all." Elena had mounted the mare with an ease that spoke of long familiarity with horses. For a moment, Samuel saw her as she might have been, free in the wild places, unbowed by civilization's cruel hands. Then the moment passed, and they were just two damaged souls on a dusty street, watched by a town that would gossip about this day for years to come. As they rode out of Willow Creek, the sun finally dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. Their shadows stretched long across the dusty road, two dark figures heading into an uncertain future. Behind them, the town grew small, its judgment and cruelty fading into the gathering dusk. Elena rode straight back beside him, her silence as heavy as the chains she'd worn. Samuel didn't push for conversation. He'd bought her freedom, not her trust. And he knew well enough that some things couldn't be purchased at any price. The road ahead was long, and the ranch that awaited them was no paradise, just another piece of hard land under an unforgiving sky. But it was a beginning, and in the harsh arithmetic of the frontier, sometimes that was all you could hope for. The journey stretched before them like a ribbon of dust and broken dreams. They'd been riding for 3 hours since leaving Willow Creek, and the moon had risen full and bright, casting the desert in shades of silver and shadow. The only sounds were the steady clip-clop of hooves on hard-packed earth and the distant howl of coyotes calling to their kin. Elena rode as if born to the saddle, her body moving in perfect rhythm with the mare despite her obvious exhaustion. Samuel watched her from the corner of his eye, noting the way she constantly scanned the horizon, the tension in her shoulders that never quite eased. She reminded him of a Mustang he'd once caught, beautiful, fierce, and ready to bolt at the first sign of weakness. "We'll camp soon," he said, breaking the long silence. His voice sounded rough from disuse. She didn't acknowledge his words, just kept her gaze fixed on the darkness ahead. Samuel didn't press. He'd learned long ago that silence could be its own form of communication, especially with those who'd been hurt by too many words. They rode on until they reached a small grove of cottonwoods clustered around a spring, one of the few reliable water sources on the trail to his ranch. Samuel dismounted, his movement stiff from the long ride. Elena remained mounted, watching him with those amber eyes that seemed to glow in the moonlight. "This is safe ground," he said, loosening Redemption's cinch. "Water's clean, and the trees give cover. We'll rest here tonight. And if I choose to keep riding—" Her voice carried a challenge, testing boundaries. Samuel shrugged, continuing to tend his horse. "Mare's tired, even if you're not. Push her too hard in this country, and you'll both end up buzzard food. But it's your choice." He turned his back on her, gathering dry wood for a fire. It was a calculated risk, showing vulnerability to someone who'd made it clear she trusted no one. But sometimes the best way to prove you meant no harm was to offer up your back to their blade. He heard her dismount, the soft thud of boots hitting sand. "Just for tonight," she said, as if making a concession. Samuel built the fire in silence, the familiar ritual calming his nerves. The flames caught quickly, casting dancing shadows against the cottonwood trunks. He set up a simple camp, 2 bedrolls on opposite sides of the fire, his rifle within easy reach. From his saddlebags, he produced hardtack, jerky, and a can of peaches he'd been saving. Elena tended her mare with surprising gentleness, her hands sure and gentle as she checked the animal's hooves and rubbed her down with handfuls of dry grass. When she finished, she approached the fire warily, like a wild animal drawn by warmth but ready to flee. Hungry, Samuel held out the food without looking at her directly. She snatched the offerings and retreated to her side of the fire, eating with the focused intensity of someone who'd known real hunger. Samuel ate his own portion slowly, his eyes on the flames. "Why?" The word burst from Elena like it had been fighting to escape. "Why did you buy me? What do you want?" Samuel considered his answer carefully. "Couldn't stand to watch it anymore," he said finally. "What they were doing, what they would have done. As for what I want," he met her gaze across the fire. "Right now, I want to get home to my ranch. After that, we'll see. Everyone wants something," she said bitterly. "Men especially." "True enough," Samuel agreed. "I want good workers for my ranch. I want to bring in my herd before winter. I want to sleep at night without ghosts haunting my dreams. But none of that involves taking anything from you that you don't choose to give." Elena studied him with those fierce eyes, searching for the lie. The firelight played across her face, softening the harsh lines of exhaustion and fear. "And if I run?" "Then you run," Samuel said simply. "I won't chase you, but I'd ask you to consider where you're running to. That desert out there doesn't care about anyone's freedom. It'll kill you just as dead as any man might." A cold wind swept through the camp, making the fire dance wildly. Elena pulled the thin blanket he'd given her tighter around her shoulders. Samuel noticed her shiver and, without comment, added more wood to the fire. "Your ranch," she said after a long silence. "What's it like?" "Hard land," Samuel admitted. 300 acres of scrub and stone, with just enough grass to keep cattle alive if you know where to look. Got a good well, though. And the house is solid. Few hands to help with the work. Tom Brennan, old Miguel Santana, and young Billy Crawford. They're good men. Keep to themselves mostly. And they'll expect me to... She didn't finish the sentence, but the implication hung heavy in the air. They'll expect you to work, same as everyone else. Nothing more. Samuel's voice turned hard. I don't run that kind of place. Anyone who thinks different will answer to me. Elena absorbed this information, her expression unreadable. Then, so quietly, he almost missed it. I've never had a real home. The admission seemed to surprise her as much as him. Samuel poked at the fire, giving her space to continue or retreat as she chose. They told you I was wild, she said, her voice gaining strength. Like I was some kind of animal, but I wasn't always. She trailed off, lost in memories that seemed to pain her. Samuel waited, patient as he'd learned to be with spooked horses and damaged souls. I know this land, she continued eventually. Every canyon, every hidden spring, every place a person can shelter from storms. That's how I survived after... She cut herself off abruptly. They caught me taking food. I was hungry. That's all. No shame in being hungry. Samuel said quietly. They made it shameful. Made me shameful. The bitterness in her voice could have curdled milk. Wild girl. They called me untamed. Like I was less than human for choosing freedom over their cages. A coyote howled in the distance, answered by another, then another, until the night filled with their eerie song. Elena tilted her head, listening with an expression almost like longing. You understand them, Samuel observed. She looked at him sharply, as if expecting mockery. Finding none, she nodded slowly. Sometimes better than I understand people. They lapsed into silence again. But it was a different quality of silence now, still wary, but no longer quite as hostile. Samuel banked the fire for the night, then stood, stretching muscles cramped from riding. I'll take first watch, he said. Get some sleep. Long ride tomorrow. Elena's hand moved instinctively to where a weapon might be, finding nothing. You're not going to... I'm going to sit by that cottonwood and make sure nothing bothers us, Samuel interrupted. Same as I do every night on the trail. Your bedroll's there. Use it or don't, but rest if you can. You'll need your strength. He moved to the tree he'd indicated, rifle across his knees, giving her the space of the entire camp. Elena watched him for long moments, clearly torn between exhaustion and distrust. Finally, bone-deep weariness won. She curled up on the bedroll like a cat, never quite relaxing even as her eyes drifted shut. Samuel kept watch as the stars wheeled overhead, his thoughts as scattered as the bright points of light. He'd acted on instinct in town, driven by a disgust he couldn't quite name and a recognition he didn't want to examine too closely. Now he had a wild, wounded creature to transport across hostile territory to a ranch that might not prove any kinder than the world she'd fled. Near dawn, he heard her stirring. She'd cried out several times in her sleep, fighting invisible demons, but had settled each time without waking. Now she sat up abruptly, eyes wild until she remembered where she was. Bad dreams? He asked quietly. She nodded, wrapping her arms around her knees. Always. Sun'll be up soon. We should move with the cool of morning. As if his words had summoned it, the eastern horizon began to pale, painting the desert in soft pastels. Elena stood, shaking sand from her dress, and moved to ready her mare without being asked. They broke camp efficiently, working in a silence that was almost companionable. As Samuel secured his bedroll, Elena suddenly spoke. That thing you said in town, about riding into your heart. She wasn't looking at him, focused on adjusting her stirrups. Did you mean it? Samuel paused, considering. Meant it as mockery of their foolishness, he said honestly. But maybe there was truth in it too. Time will tell. She mounted up, her expression unreadable in the growing light. I still might run. I know, Samuel said, swinging into his own saddle. But you're here now. That's something. They rode out as the sun crested the horizon, painting their shadows long and dark across the awakening desert. Ahead lay miles of hard country and an uncertain future. But for now, they rode together, two damaged souls navigating the space between captivity and freedom, distrust and hope. The ranch was still 2 days away, and Samuel knew the real test would come when they reached it. But watching Elena ride beside him, back straight and eyes alert, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years, a flutter of possibility. Fragile as a butterfly's wing, but stubborn as the desert flowers that bloomed against all odds. The sun climbed higher, and they rode on, into whatever fate awaited them in that harsh and beautiful land. The Triple Creek Ranch sprawled across the valley like a testament to stubborn endurance. Its weathered buildings crouched low against the endless sky. As they crested the final ridge, Samuel felt the familiar mixture of pride and weariness that always accompanied his homecoming. Beside him, Elena had gone rigid in her saddle, her eyes taking in every detail of what might be her new prison or sanctuary. There it is, Samuel said unnecessarily, reining in redemption. The main house sat solid and unadorned, built from local stone and timber that had silvered with age. A large barn dominated the eastern side, with corrals spreading out like wooden fingers. A bunkhouse for the hands, a smokehouse, and various outbuildings completed the picture. It wasn't grand, but it was substantial. A working ranch carved from unforgiving land through sheer determination. Looks like Tom's already bringing in the horses, Samuel observed, noting the dust cloud near the far corral. Elena said nothing, but her knuckles had gone white on the reins. As they descended toward the ranch, 3 figures emerged from various buildings, drawn by the sound of approaching hooves. Tom Brennan reached them first, his weathered face creasing into surprise when he saw Elena. The foreman was a solid man in his 50s, gray-bearded and reliable as sunrise. "Boss," he said, touching his hat brim, "weren't expecting you back with company." "Tom, this is Elena. She'll be staying on, working like everyone else." Samuel's tone brooked no questions. "Elena, Tom here's been with me since I bought this place. He'll show you what needs doing." Tom's eyes flickered with curiosity, but he simply nodded. "Ma'am." Elena didn't respond, her attention caught by the approach of the other 2 hands. Miguel Santana, ancient by frontier standards at nearly 70, moved with the careful dignity of a man who'd survived by being useful. Young Billy Crawford, barely 18 and eager as a pup, couldn't hide his fascination with the newcomer. "Billy, stop gawking and take the horses," Tom ordered. "Miguel, we got that fence section needs mending in the south pasture." "Si, jefe." Miguel's dark eyes studied Elena with something that might have been understanding. "Welcome, señorita." Samuel dismounted, noting how Elena remained in her saddle until the men had moved away. Only then did she slide down, keeping the horse between herself and the buildings as if planning escape routes. "Come on," Samuel said. "I'll show you where you'll bunk." "Not in the main house?" Her question carried layers of meaning. "There's a room off the kitchen. Has its own door to the outside. Figured you'd want that." He started walking, not looking back to see if she followed. The house's interior was sparse but clean, masculine in its simplicity but not neglected. The kitchen dominated the central area, with a massive iron stove and a long table scarred by years of use. Samuel led her to a door in the far wall. "Used to be a storage room," he said, opening it to reveal a small but private space. "Put a cot in here, and there's hooks for clothes. Window faces the mountains." Elena stepped inside cautiously. The room was tiny but clean, with a narrow bed, a small trunk, and, as promised, a window that looked out toward the distant peaks. More importantly, another door led directly outside. "It locks," Samuel added, producing a key. "From the inside." She turned to him then, something flickering in her eyes that might have been surprise or gratitude quickly suppressed. What's expected of me? Work, Samuel said bluntly. Same as everyone else. Cooking, mending, helping with the cattle when needed. Ranch life isn't easy, but it's honest. Tom will teach you what you don't know. And if I refuse? Samuel shrugged. Then you'll go hungry. We all work here, or we don't eat. Simple as that. Over the following days, Elena tested every boundary like water finding cracks in stone. The first morning, she simply didn't appear for breakfast. Samuel found her by the well, watching the sunrise. Meal times are 6, noon, and 6, he said, handing her a cup of coffee. You miss them. You wait for the next one. She took the cup but didn't drink. I'm not hungry. Suit yourself. He turned to go, then paused. But pride makes a poor meal, and there's no shame in sitting at a table with honest men. By noon, she appeared in the kitchen, sliding onto the bench as far from the others as possible. Tom and the hands took their cue from Samuel, treating her presence as unremarkable. Billy tried once to engage her in conversation, only to be silenced by Tom's sharp look. The work itself became the first battlefield. When Tom asked her to help with laundry, she stood rigid, hands clenched. I don't know how, she admitted through gritted teeth. No shame in not knowing, Tom said mildly. Here, I'll show you. Watching the gruff foreman patiently demonstrate how to work the washboard and wringer, Elena's defenses cracked slightly. She attacked the task with fierce concentration, as if mastering this simple chore was a matter of survival. The cooking proved more contentious. The second night, when Samuel suggested she help Miguel with supper, she balked entirely. I won't be a servant, she spat. Neither will you be served. Samuel replied calmly. We take turns with the cooking. Tonight's yours. I said no. The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring. The hands watched uncomfortably, Billy fidgeting while Tom and Miguel waited to see how their boss would handle this direct challenge. Samuel stood slowly. Then we'll all go hungry tonight, I suppose. No one cooks, no one eats. He looked at his men. Sorry, boys, maybe tomorrow. The shock on Elena's face was almost comical. You can't. I can. Samuel settled back in his chair with a newspaper, apparently prepared to wait all night. Billy's stomach growled audibly. Tom sighed and pulled out his pipe. Miguel simply closed his eyes as if preparing for a nap. For 20 minutes, the kitchen was silent save for the tick of the clock and Billy's increasingly loud stomach. Finally, Elena slammed her hands on the table. Fine, she stormed to the stove. But I don't know how to cook either. I will help, señorita. Miguel offered quietly. Is no shame. My Maria, she taught me before she passed. Cooking, it is like taming a fire. No, you must be patient, but firm. Something in the old man's gentle manner dissolved Elena's resistance. Together, they produced a simple but filling meal of beans, salt pork, and cornbread. When she set the plates down with unnecessary force, Samuel simply said, Thank you, and began eating. The first real crisis came during a sandstorm that struck without warning. Elena had been in the far pasture, learning to mend fences from Tom, when the wall of dust and wind hit. In the sudden blindness, she panicked, breaking away from Tom's guiding hand to run in what she thought was the direction of shelter. Samuel found her an hour later, huddled against a rock outcropping, her skin raw from wind-driven sand. Without a word, he wrapped his coat around her and half-carried her back to the house. Foolish girl, Tom exploded once they were safe inside. You could have died out there. I didn't ask for help, Elena shot back, though she was shaking. No, Samuel said quietly, helping her into a chair. But you needed it anyway. No shame in that either. As he tended her sand-burned face with gentle hands, Elena finally broke. I thought I knew this land, she whispered. But I don't know anything. You know how to survive alone. Samuel said, Now you're learning to survive with others. Different skills, that's all. The breakthrough came, unexpectedly, through the horses. Billy had been breaking a young Mustang, making a mess of it with his youthful impatience. Elena, watching from the fence, finally couldn't stand it anymore. "You're doing it wrong," she called out. Billy flushed red. "Like you could do better?" Without a word, Elena vaulted the fence. She approached the terrified horse slowly, making soft sounds in her throat that seemed almost like another language. Within minutes, the Mustang stood trembling but still, allowing her to stroke its neck. "How did you—" Billy started. "You have to listen," Elena said, her whole demeanor different when focused on the animal. "He's scared, not mean. Fear makes everything wild." Samuel, watching from the barn, saw her realize what she'd said. Their eyes met across the corral, and something passed between them, an understanding that needed no words. From that day, Elena threw herself into the work with a desperate kind of energy. She learned to cook from Miguel, to mend from Tom, to work cattle from all of them. Her hands blistered and bled, but she never complained. At night, Samuel would find her asleep over the ranch ledgers, trying to understand the economics of their survival. "You don't have to prove anything," he told her one evening, finding her struggling with a harness by lamplight. "Yes, I do," she said fiercely. "To myself, if no one else." Slowly, the ranch began to accept her as she accepted it. Tom started leaving her in charge of certain tasks without supervision. Miguel taught her Spanish curse words that made Billy blush. Even the horses seemed to sense her growing belonging, nickering greetings when she entered the barn. But it was the night she chose to eat at the main table, sitting beside rather than across from Samuel, that he knew something fundamental had shifted. She was still wild at heart. That would never change. But now her wildness had found a place where it could exist without apology, where strength was valued over submission. "Thank you," she said quietly as they cleared the dishes together. "For what?" "For giving me work instead of walls." Samuel paused in his washing, hands deep in soapy water. "Everyone needs something to build," he said finally. "Otherwise, we're just surviving." Elena dried the plate he handed her, her movements sure and practiced now. Outside, a coyote called to the moon, and for the first time since arriving at Triple Creek, she didn't look toward the sound with longing. She was already where she needed to be. The evening started like any other, with the tired hands gathering around the kitchen table after a long day of mending fences and moving cattle. Elena had made stew. Her cooking had improved remarkably in the 2 months since her arrival, and the men ate with appreciation. It was Miguel who first broached the subject that would crack open the carefully maintained walls around their pasts. "My youngest grandson," the old man said, apropos of nothing. "He would be about your age now, Señorita Elena, if the fever hadn't taken him." A heavy silence fell over the table. Miguel rarely spoke of family, and never of loss. Elena's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, and meant it. Miguel nodded, his weathered face peaceful. "He's long time now, but sometimes, when I see you working so hard, fighting so fierce against the world, I remember him. He had such fire, too. Fire's all I had," Elena said, then seemed surprised she'd spoken aloud. Tom cleared his throat. "Nothing wrong with fire. Kept plenty of us alive through hard times." Billy, young and tactless, asked what they all wondered. "How'd you end up living wild, Miss Elena, if you don't mind saying?" "Billy!" Tom snapped, but Elena raised a hand. "It's all right." She pushed her stew around her bowl, gathering words like scattered seeds. "I wasn't born wild. Had a family once, a little farm up near the Colorado border." Samuel watched her from his seat at the head of the table, saying nothing. He'd learned that Elena's truths came easier when he wasn't pushing for them. "I was 12 when the raiders came," she continued, her voice flat as old newspaper. "Comancheros, looking for anything they could steal or sell. My parents tried to fight. They didn't win. The kitchen grew so quiet they could hear the wind testing the windows." Elena's amber eyes had gone distant. "Seeing ghosts, none of them could banish. They took me, sold me to a trading post up north. Man there, he—" She stopped, knuckles white on her spoon. "I lasted 3 years before I couldn't anymore. Stole a horse, some supplies, Ran for the canyons. Learned to live like the coyotes and the hawks. Free. Jesus, Billy breathed, then flushed at Tom's glare. 7 years, Elena said, a bitter smile twisting her lips. 7 years I lived free, stealing what I needed, hiding from everyone. They called me wild because I wouldn't come back to their world. Why would I? What had their world ever given me but pain? Samuel finally spoke, his voice rough. Takes courage to survive alone that long. Wasn't courage, Elena corrected. Was fear. Fear of walls, of men, of being owned again. Rather die free than live caged. Yet here you are, Miguel observed gently. Elena looked around the kitchen, at the men who'd become something like family, at the walls that sheltered rather than imprisoned, at Samuel who'd offered work instead of chains. Here I am, she agreed wonderingly. The silence stretched until Tom, uncomfortable with such raw emotion, deliberately changed the subject to tomorrow's work. But something had shifted in the room, an understanding that went deeper than words. Later, as the hands retired to the bunkhouse, Samuel found Elena standing on the porch, staring out at the star-drunk sky. Thank you, he said, joining her, for trusting us with that. You bought damaged goods, she said with false lightness. Figured you should know what you paid for. I didn't buy anything, Samuel said firmly. Made that clear from the start. Elena turned to study him in the moonlight. Your turn then. What ghosts keep Samuel Hayes up at night? What sends a man to live out here, hard and alone? Samuel was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he spoke, his words came slow and painful, like pulling arrows from old wounds. Had a wife once, Mary, prettiest girl in Missouri, and for some fool reason, she chose me. We came west together, full of dreams, going to build an empire. We said, going to raise a dozen children and watch them grow strong on frontier air. He paused, lost in memories that cut like glass. Elena waited, patient as he'd been with her story. Apache raid, winter of '76. I was in town, buying supplies. Took too long. Stayed an extra day to wait for a shipment. His voice went dead. Found her in the yard. She'd fought. Mary always was fierce. But one woman against a war party? Elena's hand moved slightly, as if to reach for him, then stopped. Samuel buried her under the cottonwood she loved. Sold that land. Couldn't stay. Came here. Built this place. Figured if I worked hard enough, hurt would fade. It doesn't. He looked at her then, his gray eyes holding depths of pain that matched her own. Just becomes part of you, like scar tissue. You learn to work around it. Is that why you stopped them from buying me? Elena asked. Because of her? Samuel considered this. Maybe partly. Couldn't stand to see another woman treated as property, sold like cattle. But mostly, he struggled for words. Mostly I saw something in your eyes. Same look I see in the mirror. Someone who'd had everything taken but refused to surrender. They stood in comfortable silence. Two souls who understood loss in ways that didn't need explaining. The night wind carried the scent of sage and distant rain, and somewhere a nighthawk called. I dream about them, Elena said suddenly. My parents, they're calling for me, but I can never reach them. Wake up trying to answer, but my voice is gone. I dream Mary's still alive. Samuel admitted. Wake up reaching for her, and the empty bed feels like a fresh wound every time. Elena did touch him then, just her hand on his arm, brief but real. Maybe that's why fate brought me here. Two broken people might make one whole one. Samuel covered her hand with his before she could pull away. Not broken, he corrected. Tempered, like steel in a forge, stronger for surviving the fire. A comfortable warmth spread between them, different from the wary distance they'd maintained. Not attraction, not yet, but understanding. Recognition of shared pain and mutual respect. I should tell you, Elena said, stepping back but not fleeing. I still think about running sometimes, when the walls feel too close or the memories too sharp. I know, Samuel said simply. Door's always open, but I hope you'll choose to stay. Working on it, she said with a ghost of a smile. Every day, working on it, as if summoned by their honesty. A shooting star blazed across the sky. Elena gasped. In all her years living wild, she'd seen plenty, but never lost the wonder. "Make a wish," Samuel said. "Don't believe in wishes." But her eyes tracked the star's path with something like hope. "Neither do I," Samuel admitted. "But maybe that's what makes them worth making." Elena laughed then, a sound as rare and precious as rain in the desert. "You're a contradiction." Samuel Hayes. Hard as iron one moment, soft as poetry the next. "Man's got to be both to survive out here," he said. "Hard enough to endure, soft enough to remain human." "Is that what we are?" Elena asked. "Still human, after everything." "Most human when we're tested," Samuel said with conviction. "Easy to be civilized when life's gentle. Takes real humanity to choose kindness when the world's shown you nothing but cruelty." They talked until the moon set, sharing smaller stories, Elena's first successful hunt, Samuel's disastrous attempt at farming corn in sand, the winter she'd sheltered with a wolf pack, the spring he'd delivered a breached calf alone. With each tale, the walls between them lowered another inch. Finally, yawning, Elena turned toward the door. "Thank you," she said, "for listening, for understanding." "Thank you for trusting me with it," Samuel replied. As she reached for the door handle, Elena paused. "Samuel? That thing about two broken people making one whole one. I didn't mean—" "I know what you meant," he assured her. "And I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give. Maybe never will be ready. That's all right, too." Elena smiled, a real smile that transformed her face from pretty to beautiful. "Good night, Samuel." "Good night, Elena." As her door closed, Samuel remained on the porch, feeling something he hadn't experienced in years, not quite peace, but the possibility of it. Inside, Elena sat on her narrow bed, touching the place on her arm where his hand had covered hers, wondering at the warmth that lingered. Neither slept easily that night, but for once, their wakefulness wasn't haunted by the past. Instead, they lay in their separate rooms, thinking of shared stories and shooting stars, of understanding found in unlikely places, and of the strange comfort that comes from being truly known by another human soul. The ranch slept around them, peaceful under the vast Arizona sky, holding within its weathered walls two hearts slowly learning to heal. The thunder of hooves shattered the pre-dawn quiet, jolting everyone from sleep. Samuel was out of bed and reaching for his rifle before fully awake, years of frontier living having honed his instincts to a razor's edge. Through his window, he could see riders approaching, too many to count in the dim light, their torches creating an ominous constellation against the darkness. "Boss!" Tom's voice carried from the yard. "We got company." Samuel pulled on his boots and coat, checking his Colt .45 before stepping onto the porch. Elena emerged from her room at the same moment, fully dressed and gripping a kitchen knife. Their eyes met briefly, a silent communication of shared alertness. "Get inside," Samuel ordered, but Elena shook her head, taking position beside him. The riders thundered into the yard. 15 men strong, their faces masked by shadow and malice. At their head rode Jake Morrison, Bull Morrison's younger brother, meaner than Bull and twice as cunning. Samuel recognized several others, cowboys from neighboring ranches, drifters, and at least 2 men with wanted posters to their names. "Hayes!" Jake called out, his voice carrying the false friendliness of a snake. "Nice morning for a visit, wouldn't you say?" Tom, Miguel, and Billy had taken positions around the yard, weapons visible but not yet raised. The air crackled with tension thick enough to choke on. "State your business, Morrison," Samuel said calmly, though his hand rested on his pistol grip. Jake dismounted with theatrical slowness, his men spreading out in a semicircle. "Why? We're here about stolen property. Hayes. See, word is you're harboring something that don't rightly belong here." "Everything on this ranch is bought and paid for," Samuel replied. "That's so?" Jake's grin was ugly in the torchlight. "Even that wild little filly hiding behind your skirts?" Heard tell she's been causing trouble for honest folk for years, stealing, attacking people, living like an animal. Elena stepped forward before Samuel could stop her. I won't be anyone's prize. The words rang out, fierce and defiant. Jake's eyes lit up with cruel interest. There she is. Boys, the infamous wild girl. Pretty thing, underneath all that pride. Shame to waste her on ranch work when she could be entertaining company. The suggestion in his tone made Samuel's blood run cold. Get off my land, Morrison, now. Or what? Jake spread his hands in mock innocence. We're 15 armed men. Hayes, you got an old Mexican, a green kid, and one stubborn foreman. Oh, and a girl who thinks she's tough. Not what I'd call even odds. You forgot one thing, Elena said, her voice steady as bedrock. You're assuming I'll let you take me alive. She moved then, fluid as water, placing herself between the raiders and the house. The knife in her hand caught the torchlight, and her stance spoke of someone who knew how to use it. Feisty, one of Jake's men laughed. I like them with spirit, makes breaking them more fun. The words had barely left his mouth when Elena's knife flew, embedding itself in the wooden post inches from his head. The laughter died abruptly. Next one goes in flesh, she promised. Enough. Samuel stepped forward, his presence suddenly seeming to fill the yard. Morrison, you and your men are trespassing. I'll give you one chance to leave peaceable. Can't do that. Hayes. Jake's playful tone vanished. See, that girl embarrassed my brother in town. Made the Morrison name a joke. We aim to collect what's ours and teach her some manners besides. She's not yours, Samuel said, each word precise as a hammer blow. She's not anyone's. She works this ranch as a free woman, and any man who says different answers to me. Big words from one man. Jake sneered. 2 men, Tom said, stepping into the light, his rifle trained on Jake's chest. 3, Miguel added, his old buffalo gun steady despite his age. 4, Billy's voice cracked slightly, but his aim was true. 5, Elena had retrieved her knife and stood ready. And I promise you, I'll take at least 3 of you with me before I fall. The silence stretched taut as a bowstring. Samuel could see Jake calculating odds, weighing desire against potential loss. The other men shifted nervously, no longer as confident in their numerical advantage. This ain't over, Jake finally spat. That wild animal needs putting down before she hurts decent folk. Only animals I see here came riding in with torches, Samuel observed. Now get out. Don't come back. Jake mounted his horse with jerky movements, fury radiating from every line of his body. You've chosen the wrong side. Hayes, when the town learns you're protecting a dangerous thief, the town can go to hell, Samuel interrupted. And so can you. Tom, if any of these men are still on my property in 60 seconds, shoot them. With pleasure, boss, Tom said, his meaning clear. The raiders wheeled their horses, Jake shouting over his shoulder. This ain't finished. You'll see what happens to wild things and those who shelter them. They galloped away in a cloud of dust and curses, their torches disappearing into the pre-dawn darkness like dying embers. The defenders held their positions until the hoofbeats faded completely. Well, Tom said finally, lowering his rifle. That was interesting. Elena sank onto the porch steps, her hands beginning to shake as the adrenaline faded. Samuel noticed and sat beside her, careful to leave space between them. You all right? He asked quietly. I should leave, she said, her voice hollow. They'll come back with more men. People will get hurt because of me. People will get hurt because Jake Morrison is a coward who needs a mob to feel brave, Samuel corrected. That's not on you. Boss is right, Tom said, surprising them all. I've known Jake Morrison since he was a pup. He'd find an excuse to cause trouble regardless, at least this way. We know it's coming. Miguel nodded sagely. In my country, we have a saying, El que con lobos anda, a haular aprende. He who runs with wolves learns to howl. Those men, they are the wolves. But here, we are the pack that protects its own. Sides, Billy added with forced bravado. Did you see their faces when Miss Elena threw that knife? Thought Jenkins was going to soil himself. Despite everything, Elena smiled weakly. You'd all risk your lives for me. You barely know me. Know enough, Tom said gruffly. You work hard, don't complain. And you got sand. That makes you one of us. This is my fault, Elena insisted, standing abruptly. I brought this trouble to your door. No. Samuel's voice cut through her self-recrimination. Jake Morrison brought trouble. All you did was refuse to be victimized. There's no fault in that. He stood, addressing all of them. We need to prepare. They'll be back, probably with reinforcements. Tom, check our ammunition supplies. Miguel, ride to the Carlson Ranch. Old Ben owes me a favor. See if he'll lend us a few men. Billy, start filling water barrels. If they try to burn us out, we'll need them. What about me? Elena asked. Samuel met her gaze. You've got the sharpest eyes. Take the field glasses up to the roof. Watch for dust clouds, riders, anything suspicious. First sign of trouble, you ring that bell hard as you can. As the men dispersed to their tasks, Elena caught Samuel's arm. Why? She asked. Why stand against the whole territory for someone like me? Samuel considered his answer carefully. Because I've seen what happens when good people do nothing. Because you deserve the chance to live free. Same as anyone. And because... He paused, then continued more quietly. Because seeing you stand up to them, fierce and fearless, reminded me there are still things worth fighting for. Elena's amber eyes searched his face. I'm not worth dying for, Samuel. That's not your choice to make, he said simply. Now get up on that roof. Sun'll be up soon, and we need those eyes watching. As Elena climbed to her perch, Samuel allowed himself a moment of grim satisfaction. Jake Morrison had expected to find easy prey, a defenseless girl he could terrorize. Instead, he'd found a united front, a makeshift family willing to stand together. The sun rose slowly, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson. From the roof, Elena watched the horizon while below. The men of Triple Creek Ranch prepared for war. She'd spent years running, hiding, surviving alone. Now, for the first time, she had something worth defending and people willing to defend it with her. I won't be anyone's prize, she murmured to herself, echoing her earlier declaration. But as she watched Samuel directing preparations with calm efficiency, she added silently, but maybe, just maybe, I could be someone's partner. The morning stretched on, tense with anticipation. Every dust cloud might be riders, every desert sound a threat. But Elena found, to her surprise, that the fear she'd lived with so long had transformed into something else, determination. Let them come. She was no longer alone, no longer running. She was home. The hastily convened town meeting took place 3 days later in Willow Creek's largest building, a barn that doubled as a courthouse when circuit judges passed through. Word had spread like wildfire about the confrontation at Triple Creek Ranch, and it seemed every soul within 50 miles had come to witness or participate in what many called the Wild Girl trial. Samuel entered with Elena at his side, their presence causing an immediate stir. She wore her best dress, one that actually fit properly, borrowed from Tom's late daughter's trunk, but her bearing remained defiant, chin high despite the hostile stares and whispered accusations. There she is, a woman pointed accusingly. The creature that's been terrorizing honest folk, Judge Cornelius Blackwood, a traveling magistrate with a reputation for both fairness and impatience, banged his gavel on the makeshift bench. Order. This is a legal proceeding, not a lynch mob. Jake Morrison stood near the front, surrounded by supporters. His brother Bull sat beside him, still nursing wounded pride from the auction. Your Honor, Jake began, voice dripping with false concern. We're here about a dangerous element in our community. This woman has admitted to years of theft, assault, and living outside the law. She's a threat to decent people. She's a human being, Samuel said, his voice carrying clearly through the barn. Not an element or a creature or any other word you use to make her less than human. Judge Blackwood peered over his spectacles. And you are? Samuel Hayes, I own Triple Creek Ranch, where Miss Elena is lawfully employed. Employed or enslaved? Jake shot back. You bought her like livestock. Hayes. I paid a price demanded by this town's shameful auction. Samuel replied evenly. But she's free to leave any time she chooses. Can Morrison say the same about the women in his employ? A murmur ran through the crowd at this pointed reference to Jake's saloon and its upstairs boarding house. Jake's face reddened. Your Honor. A merchant named Holcomb stood up. I've lost goods to theft over the years. Flour, preserved foods, blankets. If she's responsible, I took food when I was starving. Elena spoke for the first time, her voice clear despite her fear. Blankets when I was freezing. Yes, I took what I needed to survive. If that makes me a criminal, then arrest me. But ask yourself, what drove a 13-year-old girl to live in the wilderness rather than seek help from your decent community? Because you're wild, someone shouted. Untamed, dangerous. I'm dangerous? Elena's laugh was bitter. I lived 7 years in these canyons and never killed anyone. Never hurt anyone who didn't try to hurt me first. Can every man in this room say the same? The judge raised his hand for silence. Miss Elena, is that your full name? Elena Marchetti, Your Honor. My parents were Italian immigrants, murdered by Comancheros when I was 12. She stood straighter. I survived capture, slavery, and 7 years alone in the desert. If that makes me wild, so be it. Your Honor. An older woman stood, surprising everyone. It was Mrs. Carlson, wife of the rancher who'd sent men to help guard Triple Creek. I remember the Marchetti family. Good people, hard-working. Their daughter went missing after the raid. We assumed she'd been killed too. I wasn't killed, Elena said quietly. Just sold. Then I ran, because the alternative was worse than death. Judge Blackwood studied the assembled crowd. What exactly are the charges here? Being a survivor? Living outside town limits? Theft, Jake insisted. Assault. She attacked men who tried to bring her to justice. Men who tried to capture me like an animal. Elena countered. Who spoke of breaking me, taming me, using me for entertainment? Yes, I fought them. I'll fight anyone who tries to cage me again. She threatened my men with violence just days ago, Jake added. After you brought 15 armed riders to my property at dawn. Samuel interjected. Making threats against a woman under my protection. If we're discussing assault, let's discuss that. The judge's gavel cracked again. Enough. I've heard similar cases throughout the territories. Communities afraid of those who don't fit their narrow definitions of civilized. He looked directly at Elena. Young woman, do you intend harm to this community? No, Your Honor. I want only to work, to live freely, to be left in peace. And the thefts? I'll work to repay every cent, Elena said firmly. Mr. Holcomb, make a list of what you lost. I'll pay for it all, with interest. Your Honor, Jake started, but Blackwood cut him off. Mr. Morrison, I've heard enough from you. In fact, I'm curious why you're so invested in this matter. What is Miss Marchetti to you? Jake faltered. She's a danger. To your pride, perhaps, but I see no evidence of danger to the community. The judge looked around the room. What I see is a young woman who survived unimaginable trauma through her own strength and will. Instead of celebrating her resilience, you seek to punish her for it. But the law, someone protested. The law recognizes self-defense. Blackwood said sharply. It recognizes that necessity can drive desperate actions. And it certainly doesn't support mob justice or treating human beings as property. He focused on Elena again. Miss Marchetti, you stand accused of theft. Do you deny it? No, Your Honor. I took what I needed to survive. Then here is my judgment. You will work to repay what was taken. As you've already offered, Mr. Hayes, you will stand as guarantor for this debt. Acceptable. Yes, Your Honor, Samuel said immediately. Furthermore, the judge continued, any crimes committed while Miss Marchetti was a minor fleeing illegal captivity are hereby dismissed as acts of necessity. As for the assault charges, defending oneself against unlawful capture is no crime. This is outrageous, Jake exploded. What's outrageous? Judge Blackwood's voice turned to steel. It's grown men hunting a traumatized girl like sport. What's outrageous is a community that would rather condemn a survivor than examine why she needed to hide from them in the first place. He stood, his presence filling the barn. Miss Marchetti is a free citizen of this territory, entitled to all protections of the law. Any who harass, threaten, or attempt to harm her will answer to me personally. And, Mr. Morrison, if I hear of you gathering armed mobs again, you'll find yourself on the wrong side of these proceedings. If she must be punished, then punish me, Samuel said suddenly, stepping forward. I brought her to town. I'm responsible for her presence here, any debt she owes, any crime she's committed. I'll stand for it all. Elena turned to him, eyes wide. Samuel, no. Yes, he said firmly, then addressed the crowd. You want someone to blame? Blame me. But know this, Elena Marchetti is under my protection. Anyone who comes for her comes through me first. The silence that followed was profound. Even Jake Morrison seemed struck by the declaration. Judge Blackwood studied Samuel with interest. Noble words, Mr. Hayes, but unnecessary. Miss Marchetti stands on her own merit. He banged his gavel once more. This matter is settled. Court dismissed. As people filed out, grumbling and whispering, Mrs. Carlson approached Elena. Your mother would be proud, she said softly, pressing something into Elena's hand before leaving. It was a small silver cross on a chain, worn, old, precious. That was hers, Elena whispered, tears finally breaking free. She wore it always. Samuel guided her outside, away from the lingering stares and muttered threats. In the street, Tom, Miguel, and Billy waited with the horses, having stood guard throughout the proceedings. How'd it go, boss? Tom asked. Justice won, for once. Samuel replied, Let's go home. As they mounted up, Elena moved her horse close to Samuel's. What you said in there, about standing for me, meant every word, he said simply. I don't need protecting, she said, but her tone was gentle. I know. Samuel met her eyes. But maybe sometimes you could let me anyway. Not because you need it, but because I need to offer it. Elena considered this, then nodded slowly. Maybe sometimes. She agreed. They rode out of Willow Creek together, the sun high and bright overhead. Behind them, Jake Morrison watched from the saloon doorway, his face twisted with rage and promise of future trouble. But for now, the law had spoken, and Elena Marchetti was free. Not wild, not tamed, but something altogether her own. Thank you, she said as the town faded behind them. For standing up, for treating me like a person when everyone else saw only an animal. You're no animal, Samuel said firmly. You're one of the strongest people I've ever known. Wild? Maybe. But wild things have their own beauty, their own worth. The world would be poorer without them. Elena smiled then, real and warm. And for the first time since she'd been dragged to that auction platform, she felt something like hope blooming in her chest. The road ahead was uncertain, Jake Morrison's threats lingering like storm clouds. But she was no longer alone. She had a home. She had people willing to fight for her. And most surprisingly, she had a man who saw her not as something to be tamed or owned, but as someone to be respected and, perhaps in time, loved. The desert stretched endlessly before them, harsh and beautiful as ever, but it no longer seemed quite so threatening. After all, she'd survived worse than whatever lay ahead, and now, she wouldn't face it alone. The weeks following the trial brought an unexpected peace to Triple Creek Ranch. Eliana threw herself into the work with renewed purpose, no longer looking over her shoulder at every sound. She'd taken to wearing her mother's cross, the silver glinting at her throat, a reminder of who she'd been before the world tried to break her. It was a Thursday afternoon when everything changed. Eliana was in the kitchen, teaching Billy how to properly season a cast-iron skillet. The boy was hopeless at cooking but determined to learn, when the sound of approaching horses made them both freeze. Just one rider, Elena said, her trained ear parsing the hoofbeats. Moving slow, not trying to surprise anyone. Still, she kept the kitchen knife within reach as she moved to the window. A lone figure approached on a paint mare, and Elena's breath caught, even after 7 years. She recognized that rigid posture, that particular way of sitting a saddle. "Mary, Mother of God," she whispered. "What is it?" Billy asked, alarmed. "Should I get Mr. Hayes?" But Elena was already moving, yanking open the door and stepping onto the porch. The rider had stopped at the gate, seeming as frozen as Elena herself. "Elena!" The woman's voice carried across the yard, uncertain, hopeful, broken. "Elena! Is that really you?" "Rosa." The name came out as barely more than a breath. Billy, confused, started to speak, but Elena was already running. She vaulted the porch rail and sprinted across the yard, her usual wariness forgotten. The woman dismounted just as Elena reached her, and they collided in an embrace that nearly knocked both to the ground. "My little sister," Rosa Marchetti sobbed into Elena's hair. "They told me you were dead. All these years. I thought you were dead." Samuel emerged from the barn. Having heard the commotion, Tom and Miguel appeared from different directions, all converging on the scene with concern. But seeing Elena clinging to the stranger, crying as none of them had ever seen her cry, they held back. "I thought you died in the raid," Elena was saying, her words muffled against her sister's shoulder. "I saw the house burning. I saw— Shh, pequeña. I'm here now. I'm here." Rosa pulled back to study Elena's face, her own streaked with tears. "Look at you, my wild little Elena, all grown up." Samuel approached carefully. "Miss Elena?" Elena turned, her face transformed by joy even through the tears. "Samuel, this is my sister, Rosa. I thought she was dead." Rosa looked between them, taking in Samuel's protective stance and Elena's unconscious lean toward him. "You're the man who saved her from that awful auction. The whole territory is talking about it." "Samuel Hayes, ma'am." He touched his hat brim. "Your sister is safe here." "Safe." Rosa tested the word, then looked at Elena's face. Really looked. "And happy?" "You're happy, pequeña." Elena nodded, wiping her eyes. "Come inside, please. There's so much. How did you find me? Where have you been?" As they moved toward the house, Rosa explained. She'd been in town during the raid, working at the general store. By the time she returned, the farm was ashes and her family gone. "I searched everywhere for you. The army, the territorial marshals. Everyone said you must have been taken south and sold in Mexico. They said even if you survived, I'd never find you. How did you survive?" Elena asked as they settled at the kitchen table. Billy, bless him, had already started coffee without being asked. Rosa's face darkened. "An older couple, the Wheelers, took me in. They were kind enough. But—" she hesitated, then continued more firmly. "Mr. Wheeler's nephew had different ideas about charity. I married him to stop his advances becoming worse. It wasn't a good marriage." Elena's hand found her sister's across the table. "Is he—" "Dead, cholera, 2 years ago. I've been working as a seamstress in Silver City, saving money, always asking about a wild girl living in the canyons. Then I heard about the trial, about an Elena Marchetti who'd survived 7 years alone." Rosa's voice broke again. "I came as fast as I could. I hid like an animal." Elena said, shame coloring her voice. "I should have looked for you, should have—" "You survived," Rosa interrupted firmly. "That's all that matters. My brave, wild little sister, who used to rescue baby birds and couldn't stand to see anything caged. Of course you ran to the wilderness. Of course you survived." Samuel quietly excused himself, giving the sisters privacy, but Elena caught his arm as he passed. "Stay," she said softly. Your family too." The word hung in the air between them, precious and fragile. Samuel sat back down, and if his eyes were suspiciously bright, no one mentioned it. Over the next hours, the sisters pieced together their separated years. Rosa wept when Elena, haltingly, described her capture and escape. Elena cried fresh tears learning of Rosa's loveless marriage and years of loneliness. I have a room at the boarding house in town, Rosa said eventually. But I was hoping, that is, if there's work here, always work at a ranch. Samuel said immediately, You're welcome to stay as long as you like. Elena looked at him with such gratitude that Tom, entering for supper, stopped dead in his tracks. The foreman had never seen his boss blush before. That night, Elena knocked on Samuel's office door. He was working on the ledgers by lamplight, but set down his pen when she entered. Thank you, she said, for letting Rosa stay. For everything. She's your sister. Of course she's welcome. He studied her face, reading the emotions there. You look different, lighter, somehow. Elena moved to the window, gazing out at the stars. I thought I was alone. All these years, I thought everyone who loved me was gone, but she's alive. Samuel, my sister, is alive. Family has a way of finding each other, Samuel said quietly. Elena turned to face him fully. Is that what we are? Family? The question hung between them, loaded with possibilities. Samuel stood, moving closer but still maintaining careful distance. That day at the trial, he said slowly. When I said you were under my protection, I meant it. But Elena, I need you to know it wasn't just about protection. What was it about? Her voice had gone soft, uncertain in a way her defiance never was. Samuel struggled for words, this man who'd locked his heart away after loss. You asked once what I saw in you that day at the auction. I saw someone who refused to break. But more than that, I saw someone who might understand what it means to be alone even in a crowd. Someone who might... He stopped, frustrated with his inability to articulate feelings he'd buried so deep. Elena closed the distance between them, placing her hand over his heart. Someone who might ride straight into your heart. You already have, he admitted, covering her hand with his. But Elena, I won't cage you, won't ask you to be anything but what you are. What if what I am is yours? She whispered. Not owned, not tamed, but yours by choice? Instead of answering with words, Samuel bent his head and kissed her. It was gentle, careful, a question more than a statement. Elena answered by rising on her toes, deepening the kiss with a fierce sweetness that spoke of trust, hard won and freely given. When they parted, both breathing unsteadily, Elena smiled, that rare, transformative expression that made her beautiful. I should go. Rosa's waiting, and we have years to catch up on. Elena, Samuel called as she reached the door. I love you. I should have said it sooner, but I love you. Wild heart, fierce spirit, and all. She paused in the doorway, silhouetted by lamplight. I love you too. Samuel Hayes. Took me a while to recognize it, feeling so different from fear or anger. But it's there, deep as desert roots. After she left, Samuel stood at the window she'd vacated, watching the two sisters walk toward the smaller house, their heads bent together in conversation. Through the window, he could hear Elena's laugh, still rare but no longer impossible, mixing with Rosa's lighter tone. Tom appeared at the office door. Boss, everything all right? Everything's fine. Tom, better than fine. Samuel turned from the window, and Tom nearly stepped back at the expression on his employer's face. Samuel Hayes was smiling, really smiling, for the first time in years. About time, Tom muttered, then louder. Need me to move Rosa's things to the spare room? If you would. And Tom, tell Miguel he wins the bet. Apparently, everyone saw it coming before we did. Tom grinned. Hell, boss. Billy saw it coming. And that boy can't see past his next meal. You and Miss Elena were the only ones surprised. Outside, Elena helped Rosa settle into the small room that had once been storage, now hastily converted to living space. As they prepared for bed, Rosa asked, That man, Samuel, you love him? Like breathing, Elena admitted. Fought it for months. Thought love meant cages and ownership. But he sees me, Rosa. Not the wild girl, not something to tame, just me. Rosa hugged her sister tight. Then you're blessed. Pequeña, real love is rarer than water in the desert. As the ranch settled into sleep, Elena lay in her narrow bed, fingers touching her lips where Samuel's kiss still lingered. For the first time in 7 years, she felt truly, completely safe. Not because walls surrounded her or because a man protected her, but because she'd chosen this place, these people, this life. She'd ridden straight into his heart, yes, but he'd walked just as steadily into hers. And tomorrow, she'd wake to a world that held her sister, her chosen family, and a love that asked nothing of her but to be exactly who she was. Wild, free, and finally, home. Winter arrived with a vengeance that year, bringing the worst blizzard the territory had seen in a decade. The storm struck without warning on a moonless December night, catching everyone unprepared despite their usual vigilance. Samuel had been checking the eastern pastures when the first winds hit, driving snow horizontal across the landscape. He'd immediately turned Redemption back toward the ranch, but visibility dropped to nothing within minutes. The horse, sure-footed as he was, struggled against the mounting drifts. Back at the ranch, Elena was the first to realize something was wrong. That sixth sense that had kept her alive in the wilderness screamed warnings as the storm intensified. She found Tom in the barn, both of them reaching the same conclusion simultaneously. "Boss isn't back," Tom said grimly. "The cattle in the eastern pasture," Elena began, "are probably freezing to death." Tom's weathered face showed real fear. "If we lose that herd, the ranch is finished, but in this storm—" Elena was already moving, grabbing blankets, rope, anything that might help. Rosa appeared at the barn door, clutching a shawl against the wind. "Elena, no, you can't go out in this." "He's out there," Elena said simply. "The man who gave me a home when everyone else saw an animal. I won't leave him to die." "Then we go together," Tom said, but Elena shook her head. "You're needed here. If something happens, the ranch needs you. Miguel's too old for this weather, and Billy—" She didn't finish. They all knew Billy, for all his eagerness, lacked the experience for a rescue in these conditions. "I'll go," Rosa said suddenly. "I can't track like you, but I can help with the cattle." "Rosa, we're Marchetti women," Rosa said firmly. "We survive. We protect what's ours. And that man out there is yours, whether you've said the words or not." Elena hugged her sister briefly, fiercely. "Help Tom prepare. When I bring Samuel back, he'll likely need doctoring. Have hot water ready, blankets warming by the fire." She mounted her mare, the same one she'd ridden from town that first day, and plunged into the white wall of the storm. Behind her, Tom was already organizing the remaining hands, his voice carrying over the wind. The world outside was chaos. Wind screamed like all the demons of hell, driving snow that cut like glass. Elena pulled her hat low and trusted instincts honed by 7 years of survival. She knew this land, had memorized every rise and fall, every landmark, even blind. She could navigate by the feel of the earth beneath her horse's hooves. She found the cattle first, huddled against a rock formation, already starting to drift deadly still, but no sign of Samuel. Elena's heart hammered as she circled the herd, calling his name into the wind that snatched her voice away. Then, there, a dark shape against the white, Redemption standing guard over a fallen form. Elena's world narrowed to that still figure as she fought her way through the drifts. "Samuel!" She dropped from her horse, falling to her knees beside him. He was conscious, but barely, his lips blue with cold, a gash on his forehead where he'd struck something in his fall. "Elena," his voice was weak, confused. "You shouldn't— Storm! Shut up!" she said fiercely, checking him for other injuries. His ankle was twisted badly, probably broken. "Can you ride if I help you mount?" "The cattle." "I'll handle the cattle. First, we get you up." Using strength she didn't know she possessed, Elena hauled Samuel to his feet. He cried out when weight hit his injured ankle, nearly passing out. "Stay with me," she commanded, managing through sheer will to get him onto Redemption. "Hold tight to the saddle horn. Redemption knows the way home." "The herd," he protested weakly. "I said I'll handle it." She pressed the reins into his hands. "Trust me, Samuel, the way I trusted you." She slapped Redemption's flank, sending the horse toward home. The animal, loyal and sure, would get Samuel back. Now for the cattle. Elena remounted and surveyed the situation. Nearly 60 head, worth the ranch's survival, huddled against death. In the wilderness years, she'd learned to think like the animals she lived among. Now she used that knowledge, working with the storm instead of against it. She started with the lead steer, an old bull named Caesar who'd weathered many storms. Getting him moving was key, the others would follow. Using her rope and voice, she drove him from shelter into the wind. He bellowed protest but moved, and slowly, painfully, the herd began to follow. It should have been impossible. One woman, even one who'd survived 7 years wild, shouldn't have been able to drive 60 head of cattle through a killing blizzard. But Elena had learned that impossible was just another word for difficult, and she'd been doing difficult things all her life. She became the storm itself, fierce and relentless, driving the cattle by pure will. When they tried to stop, she was there. When they turned wrong, she corrected them. Her hands went numb, her face raw, but she pushed on. These animals meant survival for the ranch, meant Samuel could keep the home he'd built. Hours passed like days. Elena lost all sense of time, focused only on the next step, the next push forward. Her mare stumbled more frequently, exhausted, but game as her rider. Then lights, blessed, beautiful lights through the white. The ranch materialized out of the storm like a vision. Tom and Billy were there with torches, Rosa holding the barn door wide. The cattle, scenting home and shelter, needed no more urging. They pushed past Elena in their eagerness for warmth. She barely remembered dismounting, Tom's strong arms catching her as she fell. The warmth of the kitchen was painful after the cold, her body shaking uncontrollably as it remembered how to feel. "Samuel?" she managed through chattering teeth. "Here," came his voice, and she turned to see him propped in a chair by the stove. His ankles splinted, the gash on his head cleaned and bandaged. "You magnificent, foolish woman. You saved them all. Saved us all," she corrected, allowing Rosa to strip her frozen outer clothes, wrap her in warmed blankets. "Every head accounted for," Tom reported, wonder in his voice. "Don't know how you did it, Miss Elena. Shouldn't have been possible." "She rode straight into the storm," Samuel said softly, his eyes never leaving Elena's face. "Just like she rode into my heart, fierce and fearless and absolutely unstoppable." Despite her exhaustion, Elena smiled. "Told you, wild things have their uses." The storm raged for 2 more days, but inside the ranch house, there was warmth and safety. Samuel's ankle healed slowly but clean. The cattle, saved from freezing, it would see the ranch through winter. And Elena had proven something to everyone, including herself. She was no longer the wild girl surviving alone. She was a woman who protected what she loved, who faced down nature's fury for her chosen family. On the 3rd morning, the sun emerged brilliant on a world transformed by snow. Elena stood on the porch, Samuel beside her on crutches, watching the pristine landscape. "You could have died," he said quietly. "So could you. Difference is, I chose my risk. You were caught by chance." He shifted to face her fully. "Marry me." Elena turned, startled. "Samuel, I know it's sudden. I know you value your freedom above all else. But Elena, when I was out there, thinking I might die, all I could think was that I'd never told you properly how much you mean to me, not just to the ranch, to me." He reached out, cupping her face with one work-roughened hand. "Marry me, not to tame you or cage you, but to stand beside you. Whatever storms come." Elena looked at this man who'd seen her at her lowest and never thought less of her, who'd offered work instead of chains, respect instead of ownership, who'd stood before a hostile town and declared her worth defending. "I'm not an easy woman to love," she warned. "Neither am I an easy man, but maybe that's why we fit." She kissed him then, there on the porch with the sun painting the snow diamond bright. "Yes," she said against his lips. "Yes, Samuel Hayes, I'll marry you, but I'm keeping my knives." He laughed, the sound rich and full. "I'd worry if you didn't. From the doorway came applause. Tom, Miguel, Billy, and Rosa all beamed at them. Miguel produced a bottle of whiskey he'd been saving, and Tom declared a holiday from work as they celebrated inside. Warm and safe while winter held the world in its grip. Elena marveled at the path that had led her here. From terrified child to wild survivor to this, a woman with family, home, and love. The girl who'd trusted no one had become a woman who'd risk everything for those she loved. No regrets? Samuel asked quietly, finding a moment alone with her. Elena looked around the room, at Rosa laughing with Billy, at Tom and Miguel arguing good-naturedly about the best way to break horses, at the man she loved watching her with eyes full of promise. None, she said firmly. I rode a long, hard trail to get here, but I'm home now. Home, Samuel agreed, pulling her close. Both of us. Outside, the winter wind howled, but inside there was warmth, laughter, and love. The wild girl who no man could tame had found something better than taming. She'd found belonging, and in the end, that made all the difference. Spring would come, bringing new challenges. Jake Morrison still nursed his grudges in town. The ranch would face droughts and storms, predators and markets. But Elena Marchetti, soon to be Elena Hayes, had survived worse, and now she had something she'd never had in those 7 years of wilderness living. People to stand with her, come what may. She'd ridden straight into his heart, yes, but in the end, they'd ridden together into something neither had dared hope for, a future bright with possibility, wild with love, and free as the desert wind. Thank you for joining me on this Wild West journey. I hope Elena and Samuel's story touched your heart. Where are you listening to this tale? Maybe during your commute, at home, or somewhere unexpected. I'd love to hear. Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your stories and feedback make our Frontier community special.